Hello there. I'm Barry McLoughlin, and we are here on a very cold winter day, and I'm going to be joined any moment now by my colleague and partner, Laura Peck. And there she is right there. Hey, Laura, come on in. Welcome. There you go.
Hi.
Hi there, Laura. Welcome to Communicate with Power. Of course, you and I have become absolute partners in this enterprise, as we have been in all other enterprises, including the amazing company TLC Transformational Leadership Consultants. Got to say that. And we welcome again our hundreds of subscribers. If you have not subscribed, please look for that button and hit subscribe. We love to have you. And of course, we also then want to hear from you with regard to what questions, suggestions you have.
We're open.
Yeah. So, Laura, we've picked another very cold winter day here in the nation's capital. I should say this is the capital of Canada, and more possibly said later. But we are, talking on a day in which there's a number of major events, certainly one major event that's taken place halfway around the world. And also, we do want to talk about the big theme of crisis and crisis communications. As our many of our viewers know, we specialize in doing not only crisis communications consulting, but training in it. We do seminars in crisis communications. And by the way, that is one of the series of Communicate with Power half-day seminars that we're now launching. And one of them later on in, I believe it'll be May, we'll put those dates up, will be Leadership in Times of Crisis. And we'd love you to sign up for that. But more on that later. So, Laura, what's on your mind lately?
Well, certainly Iran is a big deal. The liberals are ahead by 6 points today. And
I
of
don't think it's
course, I've been
on the same level, but
not on the same level, but nevertheless, we're in times of uncertainty for
yeah,
sure.
yeah, that's right, Laura. And a good name, by the way, because that, of course, is the name of a seminar that we're also running called "Get Your Message Across in an Age of Uncertainty." But obviously, with the bombing of Iran, not declared war by President Trump, because he's not allowed to do that on his own, but they have begun the action bombing uh, and taking out the Ayatollah, the supreme leader. So this is a very serious thing that's occurred. No lightness of touch on that. This is a very serious issue. I guess the first major question uh, is this something that he needed to do? Is it something he's been talking about it forever? Republicans have been pushing for some action against Iran for many years, and here we have it finally, the bombing of Iran. And it goes beyond just the nuclear sites, which we were told last summer by President Trump, oh, they're taken out. We don't have to worry about them. Turned out not to be true.
Obliterated.
Well, either that or they magically built them on in rebuilt them all in a 6 month period. So, but anyway, here we have this situation now. We could talk a little bit about the impact and implications of this because we don't know a couple of key things. I mean, the first thing we don't know is what arrangements have been made with regard to Iran. Are we just going to bomb, obliterate, and move on, or are soldiers going to be boots on the ground? Are they putting in a new? Is this regime change, or is it the same old regime with a new supreme leader? All of this is hugely up in the air, and of course, it's difficult to instantly pronounce and all that. But it sounds like there was no real plan on the implications of this. These are many millions of people, and I'm sure the majority of them are not at all in favor of the repressive regime that has been in place for many years. Canadians do remember helping out the Americans when it came to the American embassy personnel. They were hidden in the Canadian embassy in Tehran, even though you wouldn't know that from that movie Argo, in which Ben Affleck and the CIA basically they solved the whole thing, and they had the Ken Taylor, the former ambassador, the late ambassador, we got to know him. And they had the Ken Taylor character just continually saying to the Americans, so when are you leaving? When are you leaving the embassy? So when are you leaving? That was mostly the lines they gave him. It's not at all true. He was actively involved in hiding them, in helping create new personas. Yes, the CIA were involved in that to enable, they pretended they were part of a movie production. And it was quite a thing to then get them on an airplane at Tehran Airport and get them out. So a lot of danger was in that, a lot of jeopardy. Canada did more than its share of helping the Americans in that time. And of course, what happened was the supreme leader had taken over, and 50 years later, whatever it is, we've had this terrible situation in Iran. So that's a huge question mark. I guess my question, Laura, is will this hurt or help Donald Trump politically? We know the Epstein files. Suddenly, we're no longer talking Epstein. Of course, we're talking about Iran, and rightfully so, by the way. I mean, that nothing can be more significant in the world than teetering on the edge of a huge war. So I guess what does this mean for Donald Trump? Any thoughts on that?
Well, the word revenge comes up a lot with Trump himself. And now, what I'm reading today, Sunday, is that Iran and the people that are left behind are planning their own revenge. And so there can be ways that they can get at Americans who surround the president and the White House, who are decision makers. So everybody's got to be on red alert.
Well, yeah. Okay. So we'll have to revisit that at some point. Obviously, we're hoping and praying that the personnel, military personnel, are not that we hope that there won't be mass casualties. We, of course, are deeply thoughtful and prayerful for the families of those who've already lost their lives, and equally importantly is innocent civilians, men, women, and children who apparently we're hearing of some tragedies taking place as a result of this. It's hard to tell from the regime what is the truth and what isn't. So I think we have to hold off on pronouncing about those kind of things, other than we hope that these are military targets and not civilian targets. That would quickly turn against the Trump regime if the Trump administration, if a lot of civilian targets were indeed being hit. We certainly hope not. All right, well, let's turn now to the big theme, because that is a crisis by definition for certainly the American government. Notice the Canadian government is not part of that initiative. We Mark Carney he's in India now, and he has made a statement in support of what has taken place, as have a number of Western allies. And I think that's true. We can't be against it because of the repressive regime. Even though I think Canada is on the record, we don't believe this should be the key element of foreign policy, where any regime we don't like or any regime that is not democratic, we have the right to move in and execute regime change at the end of a gun. And that's not Canadian foreign policy. And we sincerely hope it is really not American foreign policy, in spite of what has occurred in places like Venezuela. Same old regime, by the way, and they took out Maduro, but the rest are all in place. Not one person really has had serious consequence as a result in Venezuela. So you have to kind of wonder, what is the ultimate purpose of this, other than grabbing hold of the oil that, yes, Chavez had nationalized and taken away the American oil company's oil, and that he had no right to do that at all. They did it, but in the end, this has been a very serious, action by the American government to go in there. Um, let's talk then about crisis communications. That did remind me, by the way. Why don't we start back, because it's kind of in order. You and I were asked by the government of Canada. They set up the event, which was a very major meeting of the Canadian and U.S. Coast Guards and the Caribbean Coast Guards in Grenada, down in the Caribbean, and we conducted a 2-day crisis communications course down there for all of these representatives of the Coast Guards. And my recollection was that we were asked by the organizers down there to hold a news conference, which we would never normally do, but to hold a news conference so we could answer questions about because word had got out. What's this crisis communications program all about? And what is it you're trying to achieve? What does it mean? hovering over this was a couple of years before Ronald Reagan had launched an invasion, a U.S. invasion of Grenada, took out the prime minister and put another one in, and a lot of suspicion and anxiety in Grenada over does this have anything to do with it? So they asked us to hold a news conference down by the port. There were these ships, slowly, huge, big cruise ships coming in and going out, and that was the backdrop. So one of the reporters in the group for the news conference asked us the question. He said, "What is the point? What is the purpose of this training? Is it to lay the ground for yet another kind of invasion? Or is this anything to do with the Reagan-led, the Reagan authorized invasion by U.S. Marines?" I said, "Absolutely not. It has nothing to do with that." I told him what we had done in Canada and the United States because they were both clients of ours. U.S. Coast Guard, we had done crisis communications for 10 or 12 years for them, and similarly with the Canadian Coast Guard. But you could tell by the look on his face, he wasn't overly persuaded. But over his shoulder, in was coming a huge, one of those mega cruise ships slowly coming into port. And I pointed to it. I said, "You see that cruise ship up there?" They looked. I said, "Now, if anything were to happen, like a major fire on board that cruise ship, a very major event on that cruise ship coming into port here in Grenada, you would have the world's media here, and suddenly you have a crisis, certainly for the people and the government of Grenada." And it's interesting how that kind of stopped all that line because it's one of those kind of blatantly obvious things. And it did sort of settle down then. They were able to understand that that can be a port emergency, it can be a crisis if mishandled, if it gets larger than anticipated, or that would even be considered remotely normal. So that was an interesting little thing that timing um, was on our side in explaining it. So that was sort of like 1990, as I recall, something like that.
So
But
some people don't necessarily see why they need to take training in how to communicate in times of risk, crisis, and uncertainty,
yeah,
whereas we've handled these things, we've lived it so many times. There's
yeah.
always somebody who really says, "Well, nothing happens in my port. We haven't had any big news things happen. You and I've experienced this before." So our case studies are pretty thick.
Well, good point. I mean, and the ultimate one was the in Ukraine. We had been Canadian government hired us to go over to Ukraine, where we did three one-day seminars for the courts of Ukraine, the Supreme Court, the Constitutional Court, and the National Administrative Court, I believe it was called. And this was about 2 or 3 years before the Russian invasion. And there was a lot of people there from the Justice Department as well. So these were interesting experiences. But boy, talk about a crisis communications that ultimately did occur. I mean, the crisis really did occur. It was huge, of course, and they're still not over it because it's still well underway. Sadly, I can get into that, but that's another topic, I think. So now we're left with a very interesting thing that occurred. As I said, we had done seminars for the U.S. Coast Guard for 10 or 12 years, and one of them, uh, there was and we always did scenarios. So we always had every kind of a port emergency, every type of an incident that becomes a crisis. And that took place in, I think, around 1997,
Yes.
something like that. And then what happened was that one of the uh, one of the participants in it was Rear Admiral Richard Larrabee from Boston, who was head of the Eastern United States Coast Guard. I mean, really a very major guy. And he kind of, was a little bit skeptical. He said, "Well, Barry, Laura," he said, we don't have that kind of massive media on an issue, on an incident like that. It just doesn't really happen that way." So flash forward, and there was the aircraft carrying John F. Kennedy Jr., his wife.
1999, July
Right,
16th.
there you go. Carolyn Bessette, his wife, and her sister.
Yes.
Blanking on her name. Her sister, who I think
Lauren. Lauren was her sister. There were
Lauren.
three
That's right.
sisters in the family.
Yeah, those were.
And
Yeah,
so the two sisters were on
yeah,
board.
yeah.
Anne was the sister left behind. But,
Yeah.
what happened was that Rear Admiral Larrabee, or a lot of people just didn't think that any huge things happen.
Yeah.
And now we see with this, the number one show right now on television is Love Story, which
Yeah.
is about John Kennedy Jr.
Yeah.
and his soon to become wife, as
Yeah.
because we're on
No,
episode, well,
no, they were
they were
married.
married at the
That's right.
time when
Yeah.
that the plane
Yeah.
went down.
That's right.
But it's in, if you look at the sequences of the TV show,
Yeah.
which of course I'm glued
Oh,
to,
yeah. You're
and
good.
there's a
I am watching it too, by the
tremendous,
way.
yeah, but there's also, there's huge social media.
Yeah.
So people are
Yeah.
talking about this incessantly, but our cut at it is a little different because Rear Admiral Larrabee was in charge of the whole search and rescue,
Yeah.
and it became a teaching point as to when it became search and recovery.
Right.
And that is where the real devastation sticks in people's hearts.
Well, let's talk about that, Laura, because we'll get to his take on it afterwards. But uh, this was a very, everybody was glued to their television sets.
Yes.
Yes, he was the son of the late president. It was just massively, people were sickened by it, as they were with the Princess Diana tragedy shortly thereafter. And people were stunned, shocked, and dismayed, and very saddened by this tragedy. So we won't go back over that, but it was the management of that crisis. So, um, and it was interesting because it was one of those kind of crises where it's being done in real time. CNN was covering it live 24/7, and people would go out in the water. They'd start searching for evidence, and there were people the shore in Martha's Vineyard holding up
Seeing the luggage tag.
the luggage tags with John F. Kennedy Jr.'s name on it, Carolyn Bessette's name on it. And how come they're calling it search and rescue? Clearly, they're saying right into the camera, clearly that plane has gone down. What are we talking about here? Clearly, this, they were doing this counter kind of thing. And they had to manage the message in a very disciplined way. And you did an interview, and he
two
agreed to do this.
hours
2 hour debrief, really, is what it was on
Yeah, I,
what took
I got
place.
in touch with Rear Admiral Larrabee because I recognized that this was way bigger, and a lot of other people had to soon agree that this affected so many people.
Yeah.
There were many, many people who weren't necessarily news watchers, but this phenomenon or this terrible tragedy affected so many people. So I set up a 2 hour interview in which I asked him if I could record it
Yeah.
because I wanted to get the steps that he took when he woke up in the morning and there were literally
Hundred.
hundreds of reporters on his front lawn. And he had not expected that. This all happened overnight. He goes
Well,
out to get his
yeah,
newspaper,
right.
and there they all are.
Yeah,
And they were
he
the
knew there'd
first
be,
ones to inform him that
yeah.
this had happened.
Well, okay, so then he goes down to the Cape Cod, the lighthouse there. There was a Coast Guard facility there, and the media just converged on it, waiting. Um, but the communications of that was a very important insight, Laura. And I recall part of that conversation you had in which he said, there was like a triangle. At the top of the triangle, the first person when anything occurred, his first person he contacted was Senator Ted Kennedy.
That's right.
Obviously, Ted Kennedy was, on behalf of the Kennedy family, was the point of contact. He was a very senior United States senator, and in agreement with the commandant of the Coast Guard, with the Department of Transportation secretary, which at that time Coast Guard did belong to the Department of Transportation, and of course the White House under Bill Clinton, who said, "I want to be informed of everything." Bill Clinton watched every minute of every hour of this. So he called Ted Kennedy, then he put in the call to Bill Clinton, and then of course the Coast Guard team. And so everything was done. So you mentioned that moment when a search and rescue, when they determine it is now zero hope, we are now moving to what's called search and recovery. And search and recovery is to find the bodies. And it was very, to hear that, if you just heard that on TV and you were a family member, look out. So they had to manage that process of communicate very sensitively. And he shared that with you very sensitively, how that was done, that triangle was done.
A very
Um,
caring man who
yeah,
had handled all
wonderful man.
kinds of issues in the
Yeah,
past, but he himself said this was the biggest one. As well, they
yeah,
wanted to be sensitive towards the Bessette family because
yeah,
that mother lost two daughters.
yeah. It's
And
terrible. Yeah,
so there were many things to take into consideration. And
yeah.
he then later on went to be in the Twin Towers. This
Yeah.
was huge also.
Well,
He
let's talk about
was,
that. He became then the head of the New York and New Jersey Port Authority,
yeah,
and of course was responsible at the time of 9/11. So
yes,
you are right; they were stationed at the Twin Towers, ironically and strangely and tragically. They were saved from it, though. They were very fortunate. He was very fortunate, but he headed up the response, and he had to take. He said to you, he had to take all of the crisis communications, not just from us, but all of the lessons about managing in a crisis, leading, really in his case, leading in a crisis. So he did two back-to-back world major.
huge.
Certainly, the second one was world major, shaking. It changed the world in every way. Um, and so I bring that up because he was the exact guy that said in the classroom, we don't get that kind of thing down here in Cape Cod. We don't get it much in, so we don't get the world's media. We get Channel 7 every once in a while. So he himself, he kind of chuckled at how he hadn't fully realized how instantly, unless you've experienced it, it's not that, everybody's smart. He isn't, absolutely not. Unless you've experienced that kind of level of massive public and media interest and coverage of an event in which every single thing you do has historical significance, will be second guessed and questioned. You will be criticized almost no matter what you do. And he managed it in that media spotlight. And almost to a person, people so admired what Rear Admiral Richard Larrabee did in both of those events.
Yes.
Okay, so let's now, by the way, that does lead us into the other thing, which is we are actually, I mentioned to you, doing a course. We're doing two different courses that have an implication here. Let's start with the Professional Development Institute at the University of Ottawa, where on March 23rd, 24th, and 25th, we are doing a 2.5 day seminar with our colleague from the University of Ottawa, Dr. Jennifer Irish. Jennifer Irish is a major domo of security intelligence who has headed up the Information Integrity Lab at Ottawa U, who is the guru of all things disinformation.
She
And
knows all the data.
right. So we are combining forces, you and I, with Jennifer Irish, for a course called Risk and Crisis Communications in an Age of Disinformation. And that's the one where we're going to explore how massive is disinformation and misinformation. They are two different things, by the way, connected but different.
And she has clear definitions also.
Oh yeah, she has amazing insights and experiences in all of this. So she will be covering heavily the disinformation side of things, and you and I will be covering risk and crisis communications in that where today's social media in particular and digital media are sources of massive misinformation. Risk being important. Risk is not crisis. It could become that. COVID being a really good example of where so much misinformation was peddled out there that people began to lose confidence not only in vaccine safety, but in the institutions of government in terms of what they were saying. And if you lose confidence in the institutions that are supposed to have the knowledge, the credibility, the personnel, and so on, if you lose confidence in them, then you've lost confidence in the message and you've lost confidence. You've actually lost control of a massive risk. And so were mistakes made? Well, we'll get into that. Of course, there were going to be mistakes made of anything of that massive scale. New information comes in, new way of thinking about things does change it. Remember that don't wear masks and became masks and not wear masks and all that stuff. That's just examples of in real time, the world was experiencing something that they had not experienced since like 1918. So this was a real series of lessons for communicators around the world. And we're looking forward to that. We've done this about 3 or 4 times now. And this course is running March 23rd, 24th, and 25th, the University of Ottawa Professional Development Institute. We will put at the bottom of this post, we'll put in there information on that. But you and I are also doing our own courses in the Communicate with Power series, and we have briefly mentioned those before, but one of them is called Leadership in Times of Risk, and one of the seminars is called Leadership in Times of Crisis. And a risk is any issue that affects life, health, safety of the environment. There can be other kinds of risks as well, financial risks and so on. These are risks. How do you communicate in the face of such risks? Telling you, like, for example, they always say, never say, don't panic. Whoops. That's pretty well introduced the topic. But that is different from crisis. A crisis is an allegation, doesn't even have to be true, a set of facts that has forced the organization. It's really challenged the credibility of the organization that's managing it. So if you don't get that right, you only have a very limited window today. Everything's done on the devices, and it's all on there. And there's your photo, by the way. It's all on there, and you end up then with destroying, at least very seriously damaging credibility of individuals and organizations. So how do you get a hold of a crisis? How do you get into the driver's seat of a crisis?
Yeah.
And you and I have done actual crisis communications on very major issues. Most of them, by the way, we're either not allowed to talk about or we,
Protect the privacy of
well,
others.
protect the privacy of others. We don't want to do that. But there've been everything from, a crisis hitting a government agency, a university, a corporation, quite a number of those, in which you want to fess up if you've done wrong, take responsibility, uh, act and coordinate with the agencies that do investigate these matters. Don't duck, run, and hide, and all the things that you would think. Wait a minute, how come people still have to keep learning that lesson? It is amazing that I've often said it's one of the few areas where people have to learn the same lessons over and over again, and they are multiplied by instant communications on social media, misinformation on it, and all those other things. So that's 2 courses. We'll put up information on that. Those are taking place the next couple of months. We also have some coming up right now. One of them, encountering the media and social media. We'd love you to get involved in that. Or making effective executive presentations, briefings, and pitches. Those are two of the first ones coming up shortly. So we have a number of these called Communicate with Power. We'll put that up on our website as well as on our on the
Substack.
Substack as well. So Laura, I think that's probably enough for a cold, wintry day. At least it's sunny out, but we're trying to keep our spirits up in times of anxiety. So thank you, Laura.
Thank you so much, and all the
Thanks,
best to
everybody.
all of our listeners and viewers.
And
Bye
we hope
bye.
and we hope to see you subscribe. Thank you.